Welcome to Platemark Series 2, The History of Western Printmaking. My name is Anne Shafer, and I am your host. I'm here with...
True Ludwig.
So we're here today to do the Italians Part 3.
I'm going to give a positionality right here at the top of this particular episode. We're talking about the history of Western prints, except this is not the history of prints. This is our history of prints. And what it is kind of a reminiscence of great time spent with magnificent students in the classroom and musing on prints that we love. It is in no way encyclopedic. There are folks that we leave out because in some respects, our class was built on what was available in the Baltimore Museum of Art print collection. And sometimes there are folks that just don't make the cut, even if they were a big deal. But because we've fabricated a storyline, it's going to work anyway. So you'll be fine. You'll survive.
Yeah, of course you will. Yeah, I feel like we're offering up at least enough for people to get the gist of the history of visual culture, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And probably we'll glean some insight into our, power of the print and the power of protest and all that good stuff.
Sure.
Right.
I mean, but if it's something that you didn't talk about the Domenico Campagnola, well, then
give us a call.
I didn't. Well, no, don't even bother. Just go get Linda Hult's History of the Print in the Western World, and you can look it up. And
you can read it for yourself.
That's fine. But in terms of what amuses us and it makes the cut, that's the curatorial aspect of this.
There you go.
This course that you are applying with us.
Curator's choice.
Is that okay, totally.
Exactly.
You're the curator and I'm going to make some choices and then you're going to put them together in some kind of order. And Anne's numbering order is arcane to me, and that's just fine.
All right. Well, we started talking about the Italians 2 sessions ago.
Somehow that was 2 sessions ago and I didn't realize that, but that's fine.
Well, we talked for 2+ hours and I split them up.
Okay.
So we had a 1 and a 2. 2 covered Mantegna, and now we're going on to
some others,
and I'm a little afraid I might have to split this one into 2 too.
Well, maybe not. I'm feeling particularly vulnerable today. I'm not feeling particularly intelligent. It's near the end of the semester at Maryland Institute College of Art, and it has been the in-person semester after a year spent on Zoom. And I think we've all been trying to behave really well in the classroom, and we're all really tired. And if we thought that Zoom made us tired, being it with people is making us tired too. And some people are just crumping because they're worn out. And it's not just the students, it's some of the faculty. And I think the bottom line is that keeping a sense of humor is essential, and that's kind of be what happens here. So
possibly you could admit that we're doing a colloquial.
Oh my Lord! Absolutely,
colloquial history.
It is completely colloquial because, one of the things about teaching art history, and Anne has heard me say this many's the time, that the only person that can take the fun out of art history is an art historian.
That would be correct,
and that is absolutely tragic because that's not necessary. The idea of meeting the students where they are and getting a hook. And dragging them in and seeing the light turn on in their eyes is really, really important. And, at Maryland Institute, our students have 2.5-hour long art history classes. They only meet once a week. So something dramatic has to happen to keep those guys engaged. Squirrel! Because some of them are on Adderall and some of them aren't and should be. And maybe I should be on Adderall and maybe I shouldn't be. But it's very difficult at times to keep young folk engaged with art in the dark. And yet it happened. And in fact, the best part about History of Prints with Anne was that they weren't in the dark. We were in the light.
That's right.
We looked into the light and we brought these prints into the light. And that was part of what made it so dazzling. And so the fact that Anne is spending all this time finding the best impressions of them to put up digitally for you to enjoy online is quite wonderful as well. Because honestly, when I started teaching this class, I was still working on Linda Hult's book, which is still really the authoritative history of prints, except it's got those sad little 1996 black and white.
The illustrations are terrible.
Well, in her day, they might have seemed real. Sorry, Linda, but they may have seemed really good. But my God, what's available on digital? Like you can make a Dürer engraving the size of the side of your house now.
Yeah.
Thinking about things in the size the actual size that they are versus the amount of the monumental impact that they had. That's the other wonderful thing about History of Prints.
Well, right. And the thing that was so magical about the class that you taught at MICA that I ably assisted you with was that it was looking at the actual objects. And I never had an art history class that looked at the actual objects. I mean, it's miraculous.
That was the thing. I mean, it's just the reason we have to share this. And like I say, this is a reminiscence. And there are going to be times when we actually use students' names and there were times when we pulled images at a very specific moment for a very specific person. And there are times like today where things can actually, you realize that they link up very specifically with things that are going on in our world at this very moment.
Right. Nothing changes, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, except for technology, maybe. Okay. Right. So before we get too far into our subject today, we should set the stage with our own positionalities.
So I am a gay white trans man. I was born and raised in the Midwest. And
Iowa specifically.
Oh, very specifically Iowa. Although in some respects, I think about that in terms of my work ethic, but seeing what's happening there politically recently, I'm going to sort of just say, I've got my good Midwestern work ethic, and I know it's
times are different. Yeah, I'm a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. We are recording this at the Purple Crayon Press.
Booyah.
Booyah, True's Press in Charles Village, Baltimore. It is the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. All right, we're going to take a micro break, and when we come back, we will get rolling with Italians Part 3.
Well, if we were going to be doing this in a classroom, I would start this kind of talk off with the thought that we had kept the Italians on one side of the Alps, and we kept the Northern Renaissance artists on the north side of the Alps, and that nary the twain seemed to have met, but it was Albrecht Dürer that seemed to be the one that perforated that membrane first. And by the time we hit about 1500, we start really seeing an interchange between the North and the South, and it becomes more of a two-way street. And the reason that is because of the printed image. Because as we'll see as we go on today, in some respects, prints become portable museums in terms of just, being wonderful ways of showing the man of sorrows or having you have your own pocket saint to protect you, which a print might have been in the 15th century. In the 16th century, we see a lot of change. So this two-way street that I start thinking of it that way because as we move forward, if we had thought about roughly 1475, on one side of the Alps, we might have had Palaiuolo's Battle of the 10 Nudes, and it'd be this very Renaissance, very buff nude men chopping and hacking at each other and showing the battle scene, and they'd be looking tremendously sculptural and kind of in a bas relief against a background of sorghum, and it'd be look almost as though it were a drawing of a relief sculpture. But at the same time, on the opposite side of the Alps, I would show them Martin Schongauer's Torment of St. Anthony and this maelstrom of nasty, snarling, biting, evil, awful, Dr. Seussian-looking, spiky, feathered, wingy, cloddy,
they're
creepy,
so different,
gnarly creatures picking away at this
really
poor aged
crazy
saint, and they're lifting him up into the air. And one is got these super high contrasts and these awkward, gnarly, beastie figures in the north, and in the south, these very elegant, though battling nudes that seem to be perfectly proportioned and tremendously muscular. And it's hard to believe that these were things that were happening at exactly the same time. But by the time we get to about 1500, and Dürer has made his first foray over the Alps, and he's soon to make his second one, we start to see that there's a crossover. And so where we're going to head today is we're going to start with Marc'Antonio Raimondi.
Oh, yes, Marc'Antonio
Raimondi with a variety of birth and death dates, but roughly 1472, maybe as late as 1480.
I wish we could pin this. Like it just
come on, the guy.
I know, but
1434.
Somebody go find it.
He's dead. Well, no tombstones. So, there were a couple reasons for that too. But Marc'Antonio Raimondi, very much an Italian, was born in Bologna. And he was trained under a painter/goldsmith. So he had that fine motor skill of designing things in very close focus. And by 1506, he's visited Venice, and we know that he's wanting to understand the print tradition that's going on there. And the big group of people that are working there, Giulio Campagnola is one of them, and we're not going to talk about him at all. Even though if we were to compare Giulio Campagnola's Battle of the Nudes against the Polaiuolo, they look wildly different because Venetians, as relaxed and cosmopolitan as they are, have a different design sense than our friends down in Florence.
Well, I think that's the coolest part. I mean, Italy is not really a country yet. It's duchies, right?
It's duchies and republics.
And so because they are separate governments and basically separate countries in name or not name, and they're really far apart
by foot,
that this incredibly different kind of aesthetic is born.
And so when I try to get my students to understand, you've got Florence and you've got Rome, and you're thinking, hello, that's Bidey Jean. You have Florence and Rome, who have this very stern intellectual kind of approach to making art. And it's a philosophical and a very structured, kind of an analytical way of pursuing things. And the Venetians, are all about color and light. And so the Venetians in their paintings, it's the concept of colorito and a diagonal kind of freeform composition and understanding the surfaces of the voluptuous surfaces, or if you're a student writing on an essay, voluptuous.
No.
Yeah. Surfaces of the female body. The nude in Venetian painting is everywhere present. Thank you so much, Titian and friends. But and the market is different. In addition to the fact that Venice, Italy, I equate that with Venice, California, and it has a completely different vibe than the New York or Washington D.C. of Florence and Rome. In fact,
Rome is controlled by the Vatican, right?
Absolutely. So it's very DC-ish in its kind of. In its approach to what art should and will be, and who's commissioning it and for what. So, but here's this young man, MarcAntonio Raimondi, who goes from Bologna up to Venice, and he is, according to Vasari, who is the very first important biographer of artists, and he's phenomenally important. In fact, if you do your deep Googling. Did I tell you about the student I had the other day? I did a lot of research. I went to the 5th page of Google. Oh, sorry. I know that really cracked me up. But even on the first page of Google, but it is very true that Vasari had written the lives of the eminent artists and painters and sculptors, and it was
the first art history, really.
Absolutely, and it had been published in 1550. Well, 200 years earlier, an artist was nothing but an anonymous craftsperson who was a member of a guild, and you made stuff, but you weren't anybody that had any kind of artistic presence or celebrity. And certainly by 1500, you're looking at some serious Ninja Turtle-age, because you've got Leonardo, who's in high gear. You've got Raphael, who is like up and coming. You've got Michelangelo, who has like already set the world on its ear, and Donatello's already dead. So he died in 1466. But and you have Titian painting away. He should have been a turtle. So it's if you think about what's happening artistically, it's an amazing time, and we know who these artists are. And we also know that the need to get the images that they're making kind of out to the wider world is one of the things that print will be doing for us as well. Well, curiously, it's MarcAntonio Raimondi, which is so much fun to say, who actually gets us started on that new path. Now, it's really fascinating to think about the fact that if you read about Raimondi, even Linda Holtz will say he had good hand skills, but it never seems like he has a whole lot of his own aesthetic skills. Like he doesn't have the brain, it seems, to come up with his own images, but he's really good at copying and giving engraved life to someone else's image.
Bizarre.
Well, and
but he's a goldsmith.
Yeah. So trained by a goldsmith. So, it's not like he's going to be making the Last Supper like Leonardo, but by going to, let's say, San Marco, the plaza in front of St. Mark's in Venice, there's somebody selling these woodcut series of Albrecht Dürer's Lives of the Virgin in woodcut. And yet here's this artist who's trained as an engraver in copper who decides to emulate Dürer's woodcuts. Now, that right off the bat tells you something, because Dürer's woodcuts are so good that they're worthy of being emulated or restated in copper. And so right there, you can already see that Dürer has become a game changer and a name changer, because Raimondi wants to be him. He even, when he makes his copies in copper, he even uses Albrecht Dürer's logo, his A hovering over the D. And I mentioned in an earlier episode how Dürer found out about this and was pissed. He goes to the Venetian Senate, make him stop doing that. And the Venetian Senate said, okay, Raimondi, quit using his initials. But it's okay. You can keep copying the stuff.
Bizarre.
Which is, but that's the first time we've had to deal with the concept of intellectual property. But it's interesting how Raimondi is setting about ways to engrave the designs, not of just Dürer, but also of architectural images of ornaments, of pageants, of those kinds of things. And it's interesting to see him bap around trying to find out, what will I make? And so there's actually it's really a snarky series of comments. Linda Holtz talks about it, and so does Ivans, who's a great print scholar, about how Ivans talks about Albrecht Dürer's engravings and MarcAntonio's system. Because, if you really take your time and look at the images that Anne's put up there for you, the Dürer engravings are they defy imagination. The weight and the speed and the placement with how he manages to make those arcs of swells and tapers that glide over the haunches of a horse, or give you the downy fur of a rabbit, or what have you, and all of these different textures in this tiny little world that's the size of a paperback book. And here's a guy from Italy going, how do I copy this? And so one of the things that both Ivans and Holtz talk about is the meticulous plagiarism that Raimondi it does to try and understand this German prototype. And in one respect, if you think about that meticulous plagiarism, that's also really an effacement of self. Realizing that he knows he doesn't have brain power, or he really needs to know how this guy operates. Either way, flattery, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. Sure. But I think it's a guy with really good skills, but not a lot of intellectual ting, right? And so as he does this, he's copying these things. And so he does reproductions of others, and it establishes this new concept of the reproductive print, which will last on and on and on and on and on. And it's also interesting to think about how there's this hierarchy in the print world. Well, certainly at the time when Linda Holtz was writing the history of the print in the Western world, that there are chapters devoted to the peintre gravure. Sorry, Rena Hoisington, if I mispronounce French. I'm from Iowa. I never took French. But the peintre gravure, the painter engraver, versus the reproductive printmaker, because there's the side eye given to the reproductive printmaker because they're not coming up with the images themselves. At the same time, they're managing to translate a drawing, or even more importantly, a sculpture, or even more difficult, an oil painting into black and white that's carved in metal. And that in itself is an amazing translation.
It's a special skill that doesn't get as much play as everything else. It's time. Somebody needs to do a big fat reproductive engraving show.
Really is amazing. When I watch those folks that can do instant translation from Russian into English,
or on the piano.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Clinton Adams transposes
Here's
something.
A song and plays it.
Yeah, or transposes up a tritone and does the whole piece, and it's like, right? Wow, you guys should really be here and see what we just look like. But the point is that that in itself isn't a skill that Raimondi puts on. However, I wanted to share with you some of these quotations, how MarcAntonio Raimondi creates a systematic technique, and MarcAntonio's hatching is evenly spaced with graceless terminations, and the contours are overly insistent. And he creates an efficient and bloodless image.
Wait, who said that?
That's Holtz. And Ivans. I know. And Ivans kind of goes along. And in so doing, he loses Albrecht Dürer's intricacy, his idiosyncrasy, his flexible line.
Oh, gosh.
But he does translate the overall style and the compositional principles. Okay, that's a lot to dump on a guy.
Harsh.
It is. But, if you have to sit there looking at an image, you're looking at a Dürer, for crying out loud.
Oh, right.
And you have to translate.
Nothing will ever compare.
And you have to go ahead and copy the most beautiful coloratura aria with the set of pipes you have. And see how that goes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so to think about him, looking at a print and literally carving that into an adjacent copper plate. That's a thing. And so, if you think about him learning on Albrecht Dürer's Lives of the Virgin woodcuts, but then you start seeing him, MarcAntonio Raimondi, now down in Rome, and he allies himself with a certain Ninja Turtle who's doing some pretty impressive stuff. He starts collaborating with other artists, Raphael, who is this up-and-comer, and he is just the hottest thing at the time. Now,
he must have also been a master marketer, because he comes off smelling like a rose.
Always, because he was a nice boy that didn't piss off his clients.
Amazing.
Now, of course, Michelangelo, like, I am a sculptor, I'm not a painter. And
don't talk to me.
And Julius is saying, paint my ceiling. He goes, I am a sculptor, I'm not a painter, blah, blah, blah. And Julius says, when will you finish this? When I make an end to it? He was just such a dour, melancholic person. And of course, Leonardo, squirrel, and the most beautiful, delightful squirrel that he could draw the anatomy of. However, Leonardo, by that time, he was born in 1452, so he's, 48 at the time? Well, here's little Raphael. Let's say it's 1506, so he was born in 1483. So what, is he like 23 years old now? Ooh, so he's a young guy who is actually now in Rome, and he has had, the Pope is noticing, hey, there's this young man who's pretty good, and he's the blonde, in a way, he's like the golden child, okay? And so Raphael is understanding that the way to get his word out there is to have his drawings, his beautiful disegno, and his invenzione, his ability to compose a scene, which were the two things which were most highly prized by artists and the intellectual elite in Rome and in Florence. In terms of making an image, the beautiful drawing underneath and the creativity required to create a marvelous composition, the invenzione, was what it was about. Right. And so when he says, he turns drawings over to Marcantonio, who is like, hey, I'm a copyist, I'll do this. And he translates that beautifully into a copper plate. He can literally engrave a Raphael drawing into a copper plate, and presto, you make prints, impressions off of that, and there goes Raphael's brilliance, and he can sell it, and it's spreading his fame, and that's really shrewd. That's like a young man using the latest hot technology. It's the TikTok of
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and it's new. Remember, we talked about Mantegna only making enough impressions to give to the Gonzagas and and particular friends with the permission of the Gonzaga.
Right.
Right. And so it wasn't until Mantegna dies when they start printing them in mass amounts, and suddenly.
And we're talking 1506, because Mantegna dies in 1506, and Raphael at 1506 is going, hey, MarcAntonio Raimondi, I hear you just got busted by the Venetian Senate. You're not supposed to copy with it using his initials. Hey, try my drawings. Let's just see what you can do here.
What a time to be alive.
Well, we assume that it was, all of these guys are figuring this stuff out for the first time.
Right.
If you think about the guys like, Zuckerberg, thinking, we could create this social media thing and it could transform the world. And now, of course, it's transformed elections and politics and world structures, because nobody understood it was going to grow up and be as big as it was.
Right.
But at the same time, you have this idea of, these are young guys that are figuring out, I have an itch. I have a skill. What am I going to do with this thing? So, in creating this new thing, this idea of taking an original composition, a drawing, which is highly regarded, a beautiful drawing of what could be become a fresco or an oil painting, and having that engraved and showing that about and saying, look, you folks who have nothing else but time, and you don't have phones or TVs, and you go to church, and that's about all you're going to see for images is at church. And do you own a book? Can you afford to own a book? Can you even read a book? Maybe having an image and engraving is something that, I could do that. And
it's a nice medium between church and the book.
Absolutely. And it's ownable. And the other thing about a print, which is it's this art form that you hold in your two hands. It's right there. It can be yours. It's not, you don't have to go visit it. It's in your home, and you can start a collection of those in your own collection. Actually, if you were to look at my house right now, you'd actually see that this poor art history teacher actually has a few prints that, you know, it took me a year to pay off this one and that one and the other one. But the idea then is how to reproduce not just the drawings, but also paintings and sculptures and even other great prints. So, you know, that's the most important way that you're going to be able to circulate intellectual property, ideas, culture. And so it's information about art, right? It is the hottest way to get it out there. And it's literally these prints can become a traveling museum on paper. To me, that's really exciting because museums don't exist yet, folks.
Right.
You know, so how do I get my word out there? So I make myself a paper website, and those can be carried from here to over the Alps.
So the people are carrying their portfolios of things.
Sure, you know.
Or scrapbooks or whatever they're using.
Right. And so, you know, if you were to go through MarcAntonio's oeuvre, you'd see that he had done, you know, Raphael turned over a drawing of a suicide of Lucretia, and MarcAntonio engraves that for him. And you know, he's in his mid-20s, he's working on that. And then Raphael says, okay, claps him on the shoulder, says, you are my engraver. Okay. And I want you to make these after my drawings. And the main goal is just essentially, MarcAntonio goes, oh, okay, I'm going to establish my own little workshop here. And my goal, high production. We're going to get this stuff out there. You know, I'm like, you're special. You get one. That's the Montagna way. We're going to do it the MarcAntonio Raimondi way. So, you know, patrons that are interested in art and antiquities who can't afford real paintings can have real prints. And that changes the nature of the market completely. So Raimondi is doing these wonderful copies of things. The Death of Lucretia, which teaches us a mythological story or a history of, you know, an actual historical figure. So it's also got, you know, intellectual cachet as well. And then the one that we really do want to talk about, which is the one that I think it would be worth spending a day on, and certainly worked. It worked for Montagna, or for Manet, right. Actually, is an engraving that Raimondi did after Raphael called The Judgment of Paris. And he was working on this from about 1517 to 1520. And it's a good-sized engraving. It is good-sized. I would say, what do you think, Anne? Maybe, like 15 by 25. Yeah. And that's a big copper plate. And it's a very elaborate print, really. Mm-hmm. And it shows Raphael's cleverness. It shows his intellect because he knows his mythology. He knows the whole story about what is the Judgment of Paris and what are the impacts of such a story and who all is going to be populated in this set piece. I mean, it literally is a staging of an important event. And so, you know, who is my market when I create this? So the market would be what? Literate, middle-class patrons who can't afford a painting, but definitely want to show off or satisfy their own interest in understanding mythology and art and antiquity and be able to talk about it like they're upper class patrons. Yes. But they can own this gorgeous thing. And so I'm actually going to have to tap on my little computer screen now so that we can look at this rather amazing print. And the cool thing was this one that was up on the wall, or is this one that I would say you got to wait for the big reveal? And when we were in the museum.
Oh, I think we revealed this and everything else.
Not everything.
You were pretty firm on your theater.
Damn Skippy, because it doesn't take much to get a squirrel.
The first couple of times I had things all lined up on the rail, and Drew would come in horrified, like what are you doing?
You can't.
Don't do that.
Their little minds can't take it. You know, their little eyes go like they're they're like pinballs in an arcade. Yes. You can only feed them just enough at a time. So then, what did you learn, Anne?
I learned very quickly to be the stage manager,
which was so cool because then when you pulled it out and you went whoosh, and took off that interleaving, what happened?
Everyone went,
oh, or ooh, or if you were Scotty St. George, you go, that's just stupid, with complete admiration.
We got a couple of that's not fair, that bastard.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you son of a bitch, how could you do such a thing? And it is an amazing thing to be able to, lay that image in front of somebody. So this good size image is, plopped up in front of the students. And then we say, well, what do you see? And there's so much visual data in it. So think about the fact that this has been an engraving that MarcAntonio, who is now totally allied with Raphael. And by the way, this is, let's see, Raphael was painting the School of Athens in the Pope's apartment from like 1509 to 1511. And so this is, almost 10 years later. So he's learned so many different ways of showing off, right? His star is on the high ascent. So here we have the Judgment of Paris, and I am going to ask my lovely assistant, Anne Shafer, to tell me what she's noticing in this amazing portrayal.
Well, I mean, there is so much going on that you don't even know where to start. I mean, there is a central nude woman in the middle who is back to the audience, and she's got this drape, and I think that's like I never know. The problem with this composition is I never know who.
Okay, here's the gig. All you got to do, all right, look down to the right of her at her little foot.
Right.
And what do you see there? Do you see a helmet?
Yes.
And why I would think that might be the helmet that Minerva had put to the side. And Minerva is the Roman version of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, righteous war, and the arts. Okay. So Athena has put down her helmet and her shield to her right. And she's like absolutely the fulcrum of this image, isn't she? She's like dead center, almost vertical, right?
Yeah.
And what is she taking off her cloak? Maybe?
I'm not sure what the cloak's doing.
Well, it's certainly a vertical link between the earth that she's standing on and that whole cadre of people up in the heavens, right?
Right.
All right. So we got Minerva with her very muscular back facing us. And then what?
On the left, we have Paris, who's doing the judging, and there's only 2 women to choose from, and there's a little puto.
Oh, you didn't read the book, did you?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna bust on it.
I know you have to totally. I can never remember the story.
It's okay.
True?
It's cool. Because what it is, the Judgment of Paris, Paris is the boy, okay? He's this dopey shepherd boy who has to choose. And he's, by the way, looking very buff, actually. And he's seated with his big, handsome leg kind of angled back behind him on the left quarter of the composition. He's actually, look at how he's a beautiful diagonal marker on that left part of the image, and he's reaching up, and he's got an apple in his hand. You who are looking at this would go, it looks like a little round thing. I saw the apple. Thank God she's putting her glasses on. So there's the apple, and he's holding it up, and there's actually 3 women who are competing in a beauty contest. All right. So the one who put her shield down, well, that's Minerva. And the one who has, who's next to Minerva? Who's immediately to the left of Minerva?
Well, that must be Venus with the puto, right?
Absolutely, because Venus, goddess of love, and her little boy Cupid are going, Mama, Mama. And he's running up to Mama, and she's looking at it. And then there's one more woman to the left of Venus.
Right.
And to the left of Venus, not right, but to the left. Correct. To the left of Venus. And do you see what's standing next to her? I mean, you might not, but if you put your glasses on and take a look.
Look, he's got a caduceus.
That's a different thing, honey.
That's Mercury.
That's Mercury. He happens to show up. Thank you.
There's a peacock there.
That's right. Because there's a peacock, which is next to that other woman. That's Juno.
Oh.
Goddess of marriage, and the peacock is, I know.
Oh, my goodness.
That's her attribute so that's Juno's attribute. So we have these 3 hot, muscular, nude women. They are not naked. They are definitely nude. They're very pleased with themselves, and they are being adjudicated for their beauty. And it was a story that this is hilarious, because the idea was to get it was a divine beauty contest. All right. So, and Eris, who is this goddess of strife, who also appears up in the corner of this image, she is the Eris, in her jealousy, has said, you have to decide who is going to be the most beautiful. And I think, if I recall correctly, she had said to Zeus, you need to decide which one of these babes is the hottest. And he goes, oh, no. I'm going to have no part of that. Zeus, he's Jupiter. He's big god.
Slightly smarter.
Yeah. He's like, no. And so he taps Paris, who's the son of Hecuba, and says, dude, you're the judge. And he has to choose between Juno and Minerva and Venus. And who's going to win? Well, Venus has decided that she needs him to choose her. So she bribes him and says that if you let me win this contest, I will let you have any mortal woman that you want. Huh. Well, so here goes Paris, and he's saying, okay, Venus, you're the hottest. And he hands her the apple. Bing. And so who's the woman that Paris wants? He wants Helen.
Oh, Troy?
The wife of the king of Sparta, who Paris kidnaps. And that's what starts the Trojan War.
Right.
all of this from that little beauty contest right there.
And for what? Like, honestly. Anyway.
Come on, vanity, thy name is. So we have this divine beauty contest, right? And in this image, Raphael has included all of this mythological cast of characters because he understands it. He's a well-read young man. And you would say, oh, look, there's Mercury, because you saw him because his attribute is the
caduceus.
Very good. And Apollo is in there, and he's driving his chariot in the sky. You see him riding across?
Are those signs of the zodiac?
Yes, indeed, of course, because he's like the sun god, and he's, and that's all part of and Jupiter, Zeus.
Is that him?
Yeah. He's sitting up there on his throne in heaven, and he's got some big weird looking things. Those are thunderbolts that he's about to throw. Pachoo, pachoo.
They look like wheat shoes or
They
something.
kind of do, but if you were going to be hit by one of those,
sorry, Raphael,
you'd notice that. And then Diana is in there too, and she's
the one with the moon on her head?
Yeah, that little moon on her head, which actually is exactly the same as the little moon on the tiara of Madame X.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And then what's really cool is down in the lower right-hand quarter of this entire print are 3 river gods.
Yeah, who are those people?
Well, they're 3 river gods, and look at how they're positioned.
Well, yes.
Well, now one is leaning back on his elbow, and he actually, if you were to kind of put him down, he would fit perfectly in the lower kind of triangle of the pediment of a Greek temple facade, wouldn't he?
Yeah, yes.
Why, look, he could be like Poseidon.
Oh.
Well, that's a very, classical looking pose. And then there are 2 other river gods sitting with him, and they're in this particular arrangement. One of them is sitting adjacent to Poseidon, leaning on his elbow, and he's looking at us and then there's one behind him. And that grouping of guys looks real familiar. In the back of your head, you're like, God, that looks really familiar. But here's this print from 1517, maybe 1520, which is showing off the brilliance of Raphael. Now, the original actual drawing is long lost, but we have this fantastic engraving of this scene that MarcAntonio Raimondi has engraved, faithfully trying to emulate every pen mark that Raphael made, and maybe a little bit of ink wash. And he's even, in this particular print, he's actually even scored the plate with a pumice stone. Believe it or not, if you do it, like if they close in really tight on this, you'll be able to see that he scored it with the pumice stone to kind of warm up the ground and make it integrate the figures with the surface of the plate. And you'll also notice that he's also put, there's a bit of an address down there. It'll say that Raphael invenit, and you can see that it's all tucked into the grass. Who invented this scene, and even who may have executed, who may have sculpted it, which would have been Raimondi. So it's giving you the entire provenance of this image, and it's giving you landscape, and it's giving you sky, and it's giving you nudity, and it's giving you all kinds of wonderful allusions to the past. And you even have an invocation of what a river god is. Do you see the fellow that's like, you see half of his chest coming in from the right with this sort of cape over the top of him, and that's absolutely a mythological way of showing, a mythological presence. Yeah. It's used on the column of Trajan. It's used on classical temples. So
Raphael's been studying his Greek and Roman
this
precedents
is like
in Rome.
The absolute perfect thesis statement of what is good invenzione. He knows his shit. Right. And
the clouds are so bizarre. They're overlaying the back, it's like fog coming into the forest there.
And so imagine, here's this other fella, Raimondi, going, ooh, this is a cool pen and ink / maybe wash drawing by Raphael. And he turns it into this engraving. And let's print it. Presto. I mean, think about the TV that this is. It's got everything. It's got sex. It's got bodies. It's got, hate and love and war. And it's got everything. Right?
But why wouldn't Raphael have developed it further into a painting of some sort?
Well, maybe he was dead by 1520, which he was.
Oh,
sorry.
So,
because he did die suddenly, and I can't remember what it was, but Raphael died in 1520, very young, really.
Yeah, it was young.
Yeah, like the same age as Mozart, right? And so you can hear the curtain going down on the High Renaissance. Really, we can pretty much say the High Renaissance ends with Raphael, and certainly with the sack of Rome, which will be a mere 7 years later. So the point with this MarcAntonio Raimondi image is that you got, and this is just one, but it gives you a sense of really how dramatic and wonderful the storytelling can be, the invention of the composition, but also the skill of the engraver and the market that has been created by both the artist and by the engraver. And so you have all of these things coming together at this moment with MarcAntonio Raimondi. It's incredibly influential. And you have the influence of ancient sculpture. But wait, we forgot the other incredibly important influence that this print actually has.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Because if you look at the lower right-hand quarter that I was mentioning earlier, there happens to be this young redheaded upstart in the middle of the 19th century who's like, I kind of want to do an image that's like kind of my own time, but I want to invoke some flavor of the past. And so I'm going to take these poses and I'm going to use my best buddy and I think it's my brother-in-law and maybe two nude babes. One of them's going to be sitting right across from the guy wearing a suit, and they're going to be sitting in a park-like setting, having a picnic. And I'm going to paint this thing, and I'm going to call it the luncheon on the grass, le déjeuner sur l'herbe.
Good job.
And I'm going to put it in the 1863 Salon in Paris. And it's going to piss off a lot of people. And it's going to be thrown into another room, which is called the Salon des Refusés, because everybody...
What was so incendiary? That she was nude and they were dressed?
Oh, yeah. Come on, man. This is 1863. Why do you have two guys in suits and two chicks with no clothes on? Plus, I recognize her. She has red hair, and that looks like Joe Heffernan. And she's like, that's the mistress. And we know who that is.
Ooh.
And yet they're in exactly the same positions as Raphael, this great... And Manet even said, I wasn't trying to make a shocking statement. I just wanted to show a new way of the creatures of our time. And he was quoting ancient history. And it's just really funny to think how that was so incendiary and pissed off the whole world in 1863. So I don't know. I think the history of prints is a fantastic thing. If you look at this little moment here, and it's just three river guys chilling, kind of chatting with each other, and it turns into a painting that Anne will have to add to this talk.
Oh, right.
Because it's the thing that really, if you want to think about it, starts off essentially the Impressionist movement.
Right. But it's so interesting when you look at the composition that there's space between them and the river guard above them. So that, like, to me, because I know Manet's painting, I go right there. Mm-hmm. I don't go to
all the other stuff.
Yeah. I like, where's Paris? I don't know, because I'm looking at these three people on the right.
I know. So, okay, then cover them up with your hand and then start noticing all the other dudes that are there. Because, see, I'm all about Zeus hurling those thunderbolts down.
Oh.
And then if you're looking at, the goddess, the one that inspired all of this, the goddess of strife, she's in there going, I think you're going to have a beauty contest. And she's all peevish because she's not quite as beautiful anymore. So, she's somewhat envious. There's so many layers in here and these different kinds of lessons that mythology could teach us. And that's something that the Florentines and the Romans were really banking on. That whole new Neoplatonic way of looking back to the lessons of antiquity, that there were things that could be learned there in antiquity. No, they're not Christian stories, but there are lessons there. And because it's mythology, we can use nude bodies. And isn't that convenient?
Isn't that amazing?
Because if it was like a contemporary history painting, nobody's going to be running around doing stuff in the nude.
No.
But here they are nude because, of course, it's Greece. Or Rome, excuse me. It's Rome now because...
They really all run around nude.
Well, they did the Olympics in the nude, which still makes me wonder.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, not the girls as much as the poor guys.
The guys running the marathon.
At any rate. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. But then there's one other thing about MarcAntonio Raimondi, who does a number of great things, and he's established his presence. And he actually, as I said, he started this workshop where he wants to crank out as many images, these reproductions. MarcAntonio Raimondi doesn't exactly he's not an image maker, but he's an image rebirther, right? So then I'll put up an image that looks like this. And I remember this young lady looking at this image that I'm showing Anne right now. And we're in Brown 320, that big kind of quasi auditorium hall. And she says, is this happening? I said, yes, it is. And I'm going to turn to Anne now and say, Anne, would you describe what you're seeing?
Okay. Well, there is a nude woman with her left foot up on a sort of block. So it looks like she's almost in a tree position in yoga. Mm-hmm. And she's reaching around from behind with looks like a dildo, Drew.
Why, that's probably why this is a print called Woman with Dildo.
All right, there you go.
And there you have it. And it was engraved by MarcAntonio Raimondi about 1525, which allows me to open the story about MarcAntonio Raimondi being the guy who was engraving 16 scenes that had been drawn by none other than Giulio Romano, Raphael's pupil, one of his most important pupils, who had created a series of scenes called i modi, I-M-O-D-I, i modi, the ways, or also called the 16 pleasures. Mm-hmm. And this was a series of erotic images, which were then published, and it was erotica. Why, look, prints are being used for a different thing. And so it was these different...
Is this new? Is this first?
Yeah, that we
Pretty
know
much,
of. Yeah. There's one in the north of a woman on a grassy beach, and there's a courtier going, kind of honking her hootie there. But it's just, that's about all they're doing. I usually do that on the day one to just get them reintroduced to, laughing. Because there's not that many secular views, but this is definitely secular, right? Mm-hmm. And she's so pretty. She's got that look.
It's Botticelli-esque.
Oh, look at her beautiful hair. It's almost got like kind of the Princess Leia or Lita and the Swan kind of honey buns on the side of her head, and a lovely, comely wench who's standing there perfectly balanced on one foot and about to pleasure herself with a unique instrument, and some interesting clouds and landscape behind her, and she's smiling somewhat happily, I would imagine. At any rate, so this is not in the series, but it is from i modi, the series of the 16 pleasures, which were in fact published. And the thing here is that my question to you is, of the person who published the works, the person who drew the artworks, or the person who engraved the plates, who went to jail?
Oh, well, I know the answer because you told me, but it doesn't.
Who do you think should have gone to jail?
You can make a case for any of the three.
Okay.
Really?
Have at it.
Well, I mean, the publisher for deciding to publish the thing in the first place.
Right. You mean erotica?
Right. The disegno to.
Very good.
Right. The person who conceived of these ideas of not weirdo.
They're not
I'm sure
weird.
They're
Actually,
lovely, of course.
If you were to simply Google it, you could find the various different positions,
right.
It's the Kama Sutra, essentially, of Italy.
Italy, right.
Right. And okay, keep going.
Well, I feel like MarcAntonio,
he's the stupid puppet.
Or he's a stooge.
Right? I mean, he's a guy that's got some say, dude, I know you, hey.
He's doing a job.
Totally. It's a gig, man. But he's the one that gets put in jail because he's the one that makes them publishable.
All right.
Is that fair? Okay, I still have a problem with that.
But the publisher is...
Yeah, he's the guy that's doing it.
He really is.
Right. And so here's the reason, and Anne keeps going, why don't any exist? Well, it's because the Catholic Church said, no. And so they tried to eradicate and successfully did pretty much completely eradicate, except maybe for one little tiny set that exists. I mean, it might even be in the Gonzaga's possessions because Giulio Romano was like working for the Gonzagas in their pleasure house, the Palazzo d'Ate. We'll get to that.
It looks like there's some fragments of them at the British Museum altogether, but nothing, like you can't find all 16 unless they're redos.
And what they are is, here's the funny part. So these are images that are done by Raphael's star pupil, right?
Romano.
Or Giulio Romano.
Right.
And there's 16 scenes. And here's the thing that cracks me up, because when they are redone, it's the Carracci. It's these fellows 100 years later who have started their own academy. The Carracci brothers actually make the scenes. And when they republish them, they give all of the various scenes like, the amazing backdoor action, or the sideways doing this way, or all of these different positions of carnal intercourse. They're all called things like Bacchus and Ariadne.
Oh my God, Mars and Venus.
That's right. Polainos and Chrysalis. Satyr and his wife.
Antony and Cleopatra.
Totally. Achilles and Briseis. Or what is it? There was one that was really somebody, Venus Genetrix. And there's someone with his Mars with his Curious. So they're given all of these mythological names, but then you look at the images and they're doing it.
Right.
But they're doing it with these big, marvelous, heavily muscled bodies, and hand just looks away. And,
no.
It's because they had to stage them all with Greek mythological names, or rather Roman mythological names. But the fact is that, prints are being used for entertainment, erotica. Of course, the church tried to completely blot these out and almost successfully did so. Poor MarcAntonio. The poor dude is thrown in jail.
For how long?
6 months maybe.
Yeah.
And he gets out and he's trying to find out what the heck he's supposed to do with his life. And, it's 1526. And then the next year, Rome gets sacked, and that pretty much screws his career. And then, he does a few more things and he croaks in 1534. So, but let's just give him props for coming up with reproductive printmaking.
Hey, we know his name.
But I just think it's fascinating to realize that there is erotica as early as this. Now, prints were being used to create playing cards and other secular images. But, how much actually comes down to us? Well, that theory that things that get used heavily get used up, and we don't have them. So all of the super fun stuff, or the stuff that was glued onto the walls of houses, that all went away, right? But the good godly things that were held in books and worshipped carefully, those are going to continue. It
skews the narrative.
Of course it does. And it also lets you know that the church is still in charge. Poor Anne.
That's
She's
okay.
not happy about this.
But
so MarcAntonio Raimondi, let's give the boy his props. He also, MarcAntonio, ends up having some pretty great pupils. One of them is Marco Dente da Ravenna.
What?
Marco Dente da Ravenna actually is the guy that engraved the single most recognized, amazing engraving that circulated throughout Europe. Because 1506 was a big year.
Yeah.
Because in 1506 in Rome, they were digging around and they dug up this really awesome sculpture. There was that had been done variously between 50 years before the Common Era, or maybe up to 200 of the Common Era. But it's a very Hellenistic image of Laocoon and his sons. And there's a big burly father, with this terrified, sad, wailing face, and his two boys. They're all being swarmed and writhing snakes that are snaggling all around their bodies. And by the way, that's the image where there is a snake that's just about to bite Laocoon right on the butt cheek, which I usually say that's your final exam right there. But it's the most astonishing marble sculpture, which was pulled out of some rubble in Rome in 1506.
How big is it?
It's over life size.
It's big, yeah.
Yeah. Now, admittedly, parts are broken off, but it's not so much so that you couldn't get the general idea that this is a scene of torment and agony of this Trojan priest who's been, punished by he and his sons being, completely mangled by snakes. So the thing that excites me about that is this massive marble sculpture is pulled out of the ground in 1506. And there's this fella who's been chipping things out of marble for a while. He, at 23, he came up with Pietà, and then, in 1501 or so, he does the David, this 14-foot tall piece of marble, which, really shows the human figure at its absolute best, and its marvelous contrapposto and this complete Roman kind of stasis, that David is ready to look on at all comers, but it's a moment that's frozen in time. But I want you to think about what it must have been to be Michelangelo seeing this writhing piece of sculpture come out of the ground with all of this activity and emotion and drama, and what it did to the inside of his head. Because if you look at what his artwork does, what his sculptures do after seeing that, that's where all the bound slaves start coming from, and all the Moses and all there's so much more torque and energy in them that I think he just siphoned off of that piece of sculpture that came out of the earth in 1506.
But it's so bizarre to think, yes, it was a game changer, but when it was made, Common Era, pre-Common Era, most of the sculptures that we know from that period are static, single figures, maybe double figures, but not anything like it's a total outlier.
I think of it with all those dying Gauls.
Okay.
But still, yeah, of its kind. I think about what it was like for Michelangelo to like, we landed on Mars.
Right.
You know, imagine seeing this like,
right.
I mean, it's one thing to revitalize ancient Greco-Roman nude bodies and contrapposto and seeing the human figure in 3 dimensions without clothing and not being ashamed of it and resurrecting mythological ideas. But to see that amazing figure come out of the earth, talk about, I mean, this is a two-hand head blows up kind of a moment.
Wait, it came out of the ground somewhere near Rome?
Yeah. Because it had been, something like in the villa of, was it Titus, maybe?
Oh, I can't remember.
One of those Roman emperor dudes.
And it was like the word spread immediately.
Well, yeah. Okay, so it's an amazing. And actually, in my lectures at school, I'll put up the image of it. And we've been looking at David standing there, looking, really worried about the David and Goliath. Goliath is coming. Well, all of a sudden, I put up this image of Laocoon, all wailing, and his sons and the snakes, and it says, "Breaking news! This out of the just pulled from the earth, 1506." Because I can't imagine what that was like, and so and yes, it was the single most important thing. And so one of the images that I enjoy throwing up there is a print that was done by one of MarcAntonio's pupils, Marco Dente da Ravenna. Okay, so it's Mr. Pasta done just right from Ravenna. But he does this engraving of Laocoon, and it's one of the best known in Europe because it circulates everywhere.
Well, and it's really soon after.
Well, it's
pretty
not,
soon.
20 years after, but still, but there are many. Even William Blake does an engraving of the Laocoon. I mean, it really starts to appear, and you can see there's a Titian from 1522. It's the arrival of Bacchus, and it's a Bacchus and Ariadne where he's leaping down out of that chariot being dragged by 2 cheetahs. Students are like, "Are those cheetahs?" Of course they are. Duh. And he's looking at Ariadne who's on the island, and he's going, "Hey, baby, I want you." And she's, no. Well, and somebody goes, "Hey, isn't that guy with the snakes and the kids?" I'm like, "Yes, it is." And they're all part of this procession that Titian puts in because it's this boom, it's hot new piece of mythology that we can represent. So but the point is that with Marco Dente da Ravenna, that this Hellenistic statue is being made into a print, which, I mean, that is like the newspapers that in the 1940s movies, they go, and they spiral towards the front of the screen, boom, boom, boom. And imagine this. So this sculpture inspires Michelangelo and Rubens and so many artists thereafter. And here's a print to prove it, right, of what this image looks. And it's the engraving that spreads its fame because, of course, the sculpture's in the Vatican, but the print, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. That's cool. That, to me, is just, amazing. So that's the kind of thing that MarcAntonio Raimondi was doing, was having these pupils. Another one was the Caralio, who we'll talk about a little bit, who's working for Parmigianino, Mr. Cheese. That Giulio Romano guy was a pretty interesting dude, though, right?
Well, we see a lot of people making prints after him, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And he's, Raphael's big pupil, the one I think that we hear the most about.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess so.
And actually, Giulio Romano has always been extremely interesting to me. I've never really done enough research on him. I just think about those big burly backs that he does on the Palazzo del Te for the Gonzagas.
Yes.
I mean, it was for one thing, they had the whole Montagna ceiling situation,
right.
But that was in the Ducal Palace. But the Palazzo del Te was the Pleasure Palace.
Mm.
And that's where Giulio Romano really trots out all of his, I'm really raising an eyebrow here, his thunderous images. And let's not forget that he's the one that did the designs for those plates that poor little MarcAntonio got jailed for.
Raimondi.
Yeah.
See.
So what else do we know about him, Anne?
Well, we know that he was in Mantua for most of his life, and we know that one of the print shops in Mantua that worked reproducing his designs was run by a person named Giovanni Battista Scultori. Scultori, meaning he was the sculptor of the plates, really. Like, that's not really his last name, which I find fascinating.
Well, yeah,
right.
But it's fun.
It works. So now we know who he is. So he had 4 kids, and one of them was a daughter named Diana.
Bum, bum, bum. Was she actually useful?
Bum, bum, bum. Yeah, she had quite an artistic bent, apparently. And she, of all of the children, I think, is the only one we now know.
Really?
I mean,
the boys went off and did other stuff?
We probably know that she worked with her brother on a bunch of landscape plates. But anyway, so the point is, she is the first female printmaker we come across, basically, in Western printmaking.
See, that's the thing that
we've been waiting.
We've been really waiting. And the thing is that teaching this class for 17 iterations, it really went from dead white guys to let's get inclusive. And as we moved into the 20th and 21st century, we could do so. But the part that makes me so happy is that because my time is not, I work a full-time job and teach too many classes on the side. And the curator has been responsible enough to really do the ferreting out of these other individuals who deserve their day.
Well, yeah.
And could pull out from the BMA collection some Diana Scultori prints.
Yeah, we did have a few.
But generally, then if we had to cut time, she tended to get cut.
She did get cut, sadly.
But
I mean,
she's quirky in her own wonderful way.
She's quirky, and the prints that I'll put up are certainly quirky. There's one that has the most amazing poof ball cloud situation going on.
I mean, we had pie crust clouds with Durer, but she does poof balls.
They're just totally circular,
like Stay Puft marshmallow clouds,
almost, and they're sitting in a pyramid that almost looks like a sundae, an ice cream sundae. It's really weird.
So she sounds like a mannerist.
Yes, for sure. I think she's leaning into the mannerist moment.
Yeah, and that's just a wacky little range of itself.
Yeah.
Do you think her work could look slightly different because she just got to be who she was? You had told me, what's that cool thing you told me she did that had never been done before?
One could imagine that there were probably other daughters of printmakers who were working and toiling away in their father's workshops.
Yeah.
And one could imagine that lots of those women, we don't know because they never signed their works.
Right.
Diana is completely unusual, and the only reason we know about her is because she put her name Diana on most of the prints.
Like engraved
from
them?
Early on, yes.
Like literally engraved them in there, like
in the plate.
Like MarcAntonio would have.
Yes.
Which is really a big deal.
It's a big freaking deal.
Because back then there weren't necessarily, we had, Durer would put in his initials.
Monogram.
Right. Martin Schongauer did that. Master ES. Mm-hmm. Wow. We know him as ES.
Yes, right.
Diana Scultori, we know her actual name.
She would sign it either Diana or Diana Mantuana, meaning she was from Mantua.
That's neat.
Yeah.
And so, there was a show, I think it was something called Unseen Hands, and it was about unknown women in the world of print that it would be worth ferreting out. But she's one we actually know. And
right.
Yeah. And we had a couple of prints by hers in the BMA, right?
The BMA did have a few. I mean, they weren't great impressions, but they certainly could stand in as examples of her work.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that is probably the reason, well, aside from the fact that she signed her work, she drew the notice of Vasari, who was busy writing his, first art history, the lives of fabulous painters, etc.
Which is amazing that she would make the cut.
Well, right. So he wrote about her that he'd gone to Mantua and he saw these people and he met the people in the Scultori workshop or whatever. And he says, quote, "What is more wondrous, there was a daughter named Diana, who also engraves very well, which is a wondrous thing. And I, who saw her, a very young and gracious young girl, and her works, which are very beautiful, was astounded." I was astounded.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
Because, let's talk about a man's world. So it was, what was it, 1550 with the first edition of Vasari, and then there was a second edition in 1568. And
this is the 68 version.
And so and that's the cool part.
Broadening it.
He broadened it. And because in that, it was 2 volumes in the first printing and 3 in the second, but he includes an entire chapter on printmakers. So the fact that she gets in on this, and there are those that would call this the most important book in art history up until
Tima Becker or Winkelmann.
Yeah, Winkelmann in the 18th century.
Right.
That's an astonishing thing. So you got things like the first book of anatomy and the first lives of the artist. And to actually talk about a female artist, who's the next one? You'll be telling us about Gertrude Rothmann, right?
Rothmann later, yeah.
But she's in the 17th century. Who else can we think of?
There's a handful of them. Elisabetta Sirani. There's a handful of Italian ones that you can find, and more is being uncovered as scholars take a deep dive.
Wouldn't it be awesome if Artemisia Gentileschi actually made some prints?
Oh, that would be cool.
Oh my God.
That would be cool. So in the end, Scultori made some 62 prints that we know of that she signed, mainly religious and mythological subjects. She married an architect and moved to Rome in 1575, and she received a papal privilege to make and market her own work.
Wow.
Yeah.
She got privilege?
Yes.
She got her copyright?
Yes.
She was the real deal. Now, didn't you tell me she had a bunch of kids?
Did she?
I think you said something like 4 kids, right?
No. She was one of 4 in her family.
I swear to God. But she had, the fact that we have 62 prints of hers.
I know.
I mean, Raimondi, I think, was 300.
Yeah.
So that's astonishing.
I know. Yeah. And she died in 1612. So, she's very
capable. I mean,
she's totally capable.
But you're right about these clouds that sort of look like inflated bagpipes.
Well, look,
that's ridiculous. It really does. It's like, what is that, a virgin on an ice cream sundae?
After Romano, this is the archangels Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael adoring the Virgin and Child, who are seated on the clouds.
But they have that Italian Raimondi-esque, very stiff. I don't want to say stiff, but it's really, and I don't want to say formulaic, but it's
bizarre.
It is a system of how lines are going to be made in parallel hatchings, and there's a certain kind of stippling and dot. There's an overlap that looks, Holtzius is going to be beyond that. He'll take it to his own place.
Right.
But those actually look more like intestines than clouds, don't they?
Yes, they do.
But that's so what the Mannerist movement that we're going to be talking about more is as well. I mean, she's got this pyramidal structure, but there's so many odd, like even the positions of the bodies have like excessive torque, excessive twist, extra abdominals,
it's weird.
But it is the style. It's
look at all this empty space around the cloud situation.
That's just so very odd.
It's like a cartoon. You would see like a little puto floating along in the fairy tale, like parade or something.
In Mr. Peabody's.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And here's the idea.
Fractured fairy tales. Exactly. Anyway, so, I mean, the fact that she's known is amazing. And the fact that she got her privilege was amazing from the Pope. And, I just didn't want the episode to go by without mentioning our first woman.
Improper, because obviously she can handle a burin really effectively.
Yeah.
And are these images that she's engraving, are they her own, or they're after Giulio Romano, as you had said?
Romano, but this one's after Vasari. This one is
very
the Visitation.
Very complex, very mannered.
Yes, this one is after Romano again, with the twisted columns, the Christ and the woman taken in adultery,
and peculiar people,
Solomonic columns, and
Solomonic twisted up people that are a little bit writhy,
right? And then this one is her own composition,
which is the best of the lot.
And she was young, like she's born in 1536. This one's 1547.
Sheesh. I think that's the best of the lot, don't you think?
Virgin child accompanied by many angels and seated on a bank of clouds. Yeah, this one is the most successful. And you can see it translated into, an apse of a cathedral or something.
Absolutely. Really, indeed, in terms of how she's using like the atmospheric perspective of those little baby heads like fading off into the distance. And it's almost like The halo coming off the Virgin looks like as though we would be looking up under the underside of a mushroom cap, with all those those rays coming out. It's each of those is a carved line.
This little city here.
That's some wondrous command, some strength and control without. This is a line I learned from my music students: control without tension. To engrave like that that's an amazing skill.
She's accomplished.
Yeah, and to have the opportunity to be able to pursue that and to be known and insist on having your name known
from early on.
That's yay, Diana.
She knew.
Yeah.
So next we're turning to Veneziano.
Yeah, and we're talking about Marcantonio's pupils. So obviously that Ravenna guy was one, and Carralho, who we'll talk about. But here's Agostino Veneziano. And he was this image that we loved to show our students, probably from about 1531, which is an enormous engraving. It's good size. It's like 12 inches by 20, almost 25 inches, which is an enormous piece of copper. And unlike any other engraving we've shown up to this point, it's very dark. It is all engraved line, but this is using chiaroscuro to the nth degree. It's very dark, and it's called the Witch's Procession, and it's really something. And Anne, tell them all about it. Tell them what they've won.
Well, I looked at this upside down for years, so I have
Me too, absolutely.
I have to say, like, when I look at it, I'm like, wait, there's somebody riding a goat. Like,
of course they are.
Things I haven't seen. But
make it bigger.
I don't think I can.
Really? That's sinful. Okay.
I'm sorry. Okay, so there's two nude men who are leading the way. Are they cutting down grasses?
They're kind of lunging towards the left. And are they cutting down?
I'm not sure. And below them is a little person that's riding a goat. And behind them is this very strange skeletal structure of a beast that I don't know.
Well, none of us know it, but it's definitely
monstrous.
It's a monstrous beast with a long neck and ribs hanging down, and somehow it's galloping forward. And then, oh God, what's underneath it?
Yeah, what's going on there?
You mean the kid with the bum facing right towards us?
There's a figure whose patootie is face front. Very exciting. And
riding a peculiar animal that's kind of seems to have what are those wings or elephant ears?
It's like a griffin or something.
Yeah, like completely weird. And then some other peculiar kind of devilish, horned creature. Yeah. But the best part,
up above is a saggy titty lady carrying. What is she carrying?
Babies.
Wait, are those babies?
Of course.
Oh, I'm looking at what's in her hand. Hold on.
It's the witches.
Put my glasses on.
Please. So it's the witches' procession. So the witches, she's riding on this bony beast that's being dragged forward by the young stud muffins that are kind of striding purposely through these grasses. And they look at the ducks or the geese going, flapping off. But it's and the reason we call it the saggy titty lady is, well, probably because I said that in a lecture back in 2006, and Adrian Figgis heard it and then thought, why do we keep seeing saggy titty ladies in all of these images? Well, she's an old hag. She's got very saggy titties, and she's holding babies. Now, why is this ugly old hag carrying babies?
Oh, wait, wasn't the lore that witches needed to eat babies in order to fly?
Bing, 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 bing. You get the gold star.
I remembered it.
See, come on. How could you forget that?
That was memorable.
If you need to fly, you have to eat babies.
You have to eat the whole baby or like just their blood?
Don't get picky.
Oh, sorry.
So, toes, everything, all of the good stuff. I mean, the juicy, nummy parts. You can pick, there's no bony part of a baby. They're all like juicy, delicious, right? So she's all hunkered over and she's got these babies and she's got this ghastly face. But, and you'll see this woman with these eggs in socks kind of breasts hanging off of her front in many kinds of images. In some images, like Montaigne used her. And she was coming in from the left in the Battle of the Sea Gods. And she's carrying a sign that says Invidia, which means envy. And she's looking right at some comely young woman with pert, taut, lovely, upright bosoms. And so the saggy titty lady shows up. She's essentially, one of those tropes that is a good thing for a student like Adrian Figgis, God love her, to do an entire paper on, which was exquisite. It was a really well-researched paper.
I don't think I ever read it.
It was awesome.
I'll have to mess it. Adrian, send me your paper.
Yeah. See, I told you guys it was going to be a reminiscence. It's not, but it is, these kinds of things that reappear. So this Veneziano, after quite possibly Raphael, I mean, look how different this is from anything we've seen before, just in terms of it's a parade, a cavalcade, and it's moving from right to left, which instantly gives it more tension, because when we think about a parade, like Titian would do great processions, Mr. Peabody's History, right? And they tend to move from left to right because that's the way we read. Well, then you got to wonder if this is a drawing that Raphael did and Veneziano copied the drawing as Raphael drew it, and then it becomes reversed because he's copying the drawing. So, but I can't imagine seeing this thing going the other direction. I think it would be far less threatening.
Yeah, it's subtly unnerving.
Yeah,
that it's going the wrong quote unquote way.
But it's also the darkest thing that we've seen to date.
For sure.
And that tells us also, in terms of heading into the darkest thing we've seen to date, that we have to talk about the darkest thing that Rome had seen to date. And this may be a really good moment to just sort of bring in a terrible moment for Rome, because I try to burn certain times and dates into my students' heads. And we had talked about how one could say that the High Renaissance ended with the death of Raphael in 1520. Leonardo dies in the arms of Francois I in 1519. Michelangelo, well, he leads a second life and doesn't die until 1564, which blows my mind.
He was
89 years old. He was carving his third or fourth Pietà 9 days before he died.
Oh my God.
At age 75, he said, "I'm still learning." He lived 2 lifetimes, and you can see that in the work that he made, because the Sistine ceiling is, the work of a younger person who is part of a Renaissance and a time of optimism and uplift. And yet we'll talk about his Last Judgment, which is done by a 60-year-old guy at a time when the church is falling apart. Why? Well, here's one reason.
Here's why.
Because I'd say to my students, okay, you got to remember the sack of Rome in 1527. Now, what does it mean to be sacked? I'm asking Anne, what does a sack mean?
It means an overthrow of the standing government.
Yeah. Now, here's something to think about it. So,
kind of a coup, really.
Oh God, yeah. And this, but this is, okay. So it's the sack of Rome. The atom bomb fell. Think about this. All right. So, Italy, what we now call Italy, had kind of been embattled for a while, because France under Francois I seemed to want to have its little piece of it, and Charles V of Spain seems to want to have a little bit of it. He had declared himself the Holy Roman Emperor in 1519, and Charles V of Spain, that most Catholic of kings, by being the Holy Roman Emperor, was the king of Spain, of Holland, Flanders, Germany, and Austria. Italy's being invaded. But here's the thing. In 1527, this really dreadful moment happened. And I have this passage I read to my students. Quote, "They wept a lot. All of us are rich." That is how one of the participants summed up the events of May 1527, when a mutinous army under the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V savaged the city of Rome. The imperial troops were fresh off a campaign against the League of Cognac, with whom Pope Clement VII was allied, but they hadn't been paid in months. To keep them on the march, their commander, the Duke of Bourbon, had promised them a chance to plunder Rome. The impoverished soldiers arrived on May 6th and launched an assault. The Duke was killed during the fighting, but his men breached the defensive walls and poured into the city. The Vatican Swiss Guard were all but annihilated during a famous last stand near St. Peter's Basilica. Pope Clement, meanwhile, was forced to escape via a secret tunnel and barricade himself in the impregnable Castle Sant'Angelo. Once inside Rome, the leaderless army devolved into a bloodthirsty mob. Buildings were looted and burned. Men and children were tortured and killed, and women, even Catholic nuns, were raped or auctioned off at public markets. By the time the imperial army left the city, Rome was stripped bare, and half of its 55,000 inhabitants were either dead or homeless. The cultural blow was equally severe. Scores of artists had been killed, and many priceless artworks were destroyed or missing. Some scholars have since used the 1527 sacking as the official end date of the Italian Renaissance. And with that, I say to my students, May 6th, bloodthirsty mob stormed the walls, took somebody and wanted to put him in prison. Pence. They did this and that. They were completely out of control. And at the end of this, 30,000 people were dead. But this is no different.
No kidding.
No different than having someone from outside say, go do this thing. And you have a mob that goes in and imprisons the Pope, stables their horses in St. Peter's, the center of Christendom, and uses the Sistine Chapel as their barracks. That's where they bed down their soldiers. Rome is brought to its knees. Catholicism has taken a very serious hit, and it's going to take it a little while to get its poop in a group, because they have to kind of come up with a way of, well, what'll we do? The city's really been leveled. It's burned. People are just, and the term decimated is not something we would use here. Decimated annihilated is a proper use of the word. Decimated, as Ann and I were discussing, decimal, that means 10%. This is half, right? That's 5 deci, right? And so, like a decade. So the idea that a bloodthirsty mob, and these accordingly, they were called German mercenary soldiers,
right?
Because, the Germans, there were soldiers that liked to be staged, let's say, in Venice, because they were for hire and they could be useful. You'll see them actually, German soldiers in Venetian paintings.
Yeah, they show up.
Yeah, like Veronese. There's a German soldier in Giorgione's The Tempest, because they were like, hey, they're soldiers of fortune. Like, who wants to hire me? I'll go fight for whatever it is you need me to do.
Day labor.
Yeah. And so, but honestly, when I read that, and these kinds of things, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The only thing we learn from history is that we fail to learn from history.
Correct.
And it just rang so true that this whole era, and I'm not trying to be political here. I'm just trying to show that there are moments when we continue to repeat our own behaviors. So the sack of Rome was just devastation for Rome as the center of Christendom, for the strength of the Catholic Church, for the work that the artists that had been doing, like all the Ninja Turtles, for the Pope, for the kind of artwork that could be commissioned. Where's the money? Money is what buys art, right? So the kind of art we're going to see made maybe be rich people. And that's what I really use as my link to getting students to understand what the mannerist, the movement called mannerism, the style, air quotes, of mannerism. I use that 1527 as the big dividing year for that, because if we think about the high Renaissance as stability, and you look at the marvelous stable triangular compositions of Leonardo and the Virgin and Child, and they're wonderful and beautiful, and they're in primary colors and they make perfect sense. Or you have the Pietà by Michelangelo, and it's a stable triangular form that, they'd say you could roll a Michelangelo sculpture downhill and nothing would break off, because the guy understood the tensile strength of stone at its peculiar preternatural level. Or a Raphael, one of the 800 Madonna and Child that he would paint, because he's a crowd pleaser. But there are always these triangular, kind of stable, beautiful humans at their highest, most best. That's the high Renaissance. What happens after your entire culture is devastated and your church is brought to its knees and your Pope is in prison, and, eventually, don't worry, the popes come back and the Medicis will be back in power, because there's going to be another Pope. It's Leo X. He's a Medici. We'll get to them again. The Italians, you got to love them.
Yeah, there's still a Pope. We know they survive.
Yeah. But at the same time, there's this other little welter of problem that had kind of sprung up north, the Protestant Reformation, which was really gaining speed, and Luther was managing to have ways of getting people riled up about standing up for their own ability to interpret the Bible for themselves in print. He publishes his own German Bible in 1522. So, we're going to be looking at 100+ years of religious warfare. and what that does for how art will look, who it's made for, what kind of art it'll be. It's a whole new world. It's almost like a completely different kind of Laocoon and his sons. The Catholic Church is now Laocoon being consumed by these other demonic forces. I imagine they must have thought that this was, Satan come to sweep them away. But don't worry, the Catholic Church will get their game plan together, and they'll come back with a program of propaganda and beautiful artwork that will sweep you away. And if you're not swept away, then they can try you. And if you never expected the
Spanish Inquisition.
Oh, let's invent that too, just in case we have some rebellious heathens.
It's kind of nuts.
It's amazing, but artwork's really useful in prints, especially for bringing that up. So,
somebody said to me the other day that civilization goes in these 500-year clumps, and that right after 1500, there's this run of stuff that changes everything. Yep. And that now here we are in 2000, whatever, that things are changing.
Yeah.
Whether it's climate change or whatever, but that the way we are existing in the world as a civilization is changing.
Oh my God. Yes.
Right.
Let's say 2050 comes along and I might still be alive. I'll be in my early 90s. But the idea of 2050, and let's say that the globe is only 1.5 degrees hotter, and there is not one silly analog piece of anything left, that this thing that we're talking about right now, these pieces of paper or these silly scraps of fabric with gooey stuff called paint on it, that'll be nothing but pixels and pixels. That's probably going to be not, we'll be able to see such things on the insides of our glasses, or no, we won't even need glasses because our eyes will have been repaired with some kind of form of digital something, whatever, which will make things amazing. But it's those potent years. I can't disagree with the fact that, if you think about these 50-year increments, thinking about years that are potent, if you think like 1527, I burn into the brains of my students, or 1517, like boom, those are moments. 1945, duh. But 1913 is a really big, important year. You think about what's happening there in terms of music and art and, the Armory show. And you think about the atom, all of those things, and how things just this American Studies class that I had with Jim Farrell, I actually remember his name, in 1982.
At St. Olaf?
At St. Olaf College in Northville, Minnesota. But he would call something a dense fact. Oh. And John Cage was a dense fact. And I wrote about him. John Cage is the A-bomb of the art world because he was a musician and he was an artist. He was the printmaker I still wonder about John Cage setting fire to stuff on presses.
I wanted one of those.
Oh, if you didn't burn up first. But, these people that are Renaissance people that touch all of these fields, and Malcolm Gladwell, those people whose ideas, their brilliance helps us get to that next level. And I wonder what, when we look back on our podcast and chuckle about, what's the next 50 years? It's that high Renaissance was a thing, that stability and the beauty of it and the humanity. But, those guys didn't know that at the time. I think they thought, hey, things are going pretty great, and then some dude comes in and lets these mercenary troops chow through Rome.
Couldn't have foreseen that.
No, but maybe if we were bright enough to know our history, we'd be able to figure out, that reminds us of something that happened on a building that looks remarkably like St. Peter's here in the United States.
Yeah.
And uneducated people or uninformed people with very narrow minds might really think that that's appropriate. And that's, maybe that's what art is supposed to teach us, as other ways of seeing things or different ways of interpreting information, or allowing us the ability to extract from it the kind of data that we need, unlike, I don't know, Tucker Carlson or the news. Like what kind of spin doctor? Every print is a spin, isn't it? Any piece of data is a spin, right? You can prove anything with a graph. I just happen to choose these prints that were made by peoples that were excited about the time they're in and challenging the status quo and showing off the newest, neatest, latest thing. And I can be an old fart and go, I hate this and that, but I'll still be excited about a print.
Okay. All right. That's probably it for today.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to more later.
Oh, indeed.
Indeed. There's more to say.
But
there's always more to say.
We've sacked Rome, and I'm feeling sacked. So.
All right. We're going to stop. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
You're very patient people. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for Platemark Series 2, A History of Western Printmaking. Today's episode was The Italians, Part 3, covering MarcAntonio Raimondi and Friends. Platemark is produced by me, Ann Shafer, and my co-host is, as you know, the amazing True Ludwig, without whom none of this would be possible, so a special thank you to him. Also a thank you to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music for each episode's in and outro. The images that we discuss on every episode are available to you on the show notes webpage. You can get to two ways, one through platemarkpodcast.com or AnnShafer.com. Okay, we will see you next time.